Now, as it's almost Halloween time, I thought I would tell a little story to you all. Now, I don't expect you to believe the story I'm about to tell. I'd have to be crazy to expect you to believe my story. Yet mad I am not. My only aim is to place before the world, plainly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of mere common events. These events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Perhaps some intellect can be found which will explain my horrors, some intellect more logical than my own, which will see everything as an ordinary playing out of cause and effect. Since childhood, I've been a gentle soul. I was always light-hearted, and I'm especially fond of animals. I've had oh so many pets, dogs, birds, lizards, and this quirk didn't lessen with age. I married young. I was happy to find my wife shared my love of animals. She lost no opportunity to get a new pet for the house. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. The cat was big, beautiful animal, all black and all so smart. He was so smart that my wife would often comment on the old superstition that all black cats are witches in disguise. Not that she was serious, and I only mention it because I happen to have remembered it just now. The cat's name was Pluto, and he was my favorite pet and playmate. He followed me all around. I could barely keep him indoors when I left the house. This lasted for several years, during which my general temperament and character experienced a radical change for the worse. I grew, day by day, more moody, more irritable, more cruel. I cursed at my wife, I hit her, and even my pets were not immune to these outbursts. I neglected and ill-used them. However, I held my hand when it came to Pluto. But my disease grew upon me, for what disease is like alcohol? And soon, even the now elderly Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. One night, returning home, drunk, I just wanted to go to bed. He jumped in front of me, as he does. I seized him, and in his fright at my violence, he bit my hand. The fury of a demon possessed me. I was no longer myself, but a fiendish malevolence, gin-nurtured, thrilling every fiber of my being. I took out a knife, opened it, grasped the poor beast, and cut out one of its eyes from its socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder as I admit the act. The next morning, when I had slept off the beer, I realized with horror and remorse what I had done the night before. But it was a small feeling, and I again plunged into alcohol, soon drowning in beer all memory of the deed. Slowly, the cat recovered. The socket of the lost eye gave him a frightening appearance, but he was not in pain anymore. He went about the house as usual, but fled in terror when I came near. I had just enough of my old heart left to be grieved by this fear from the creature, which had once loved me so. But this feeling soon gave way to irritation. And then, for no good reason, I had had enough. Who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or silly action for no reason other than because he knows he should not? It was this unfathomable urge of my soul to do wrong for wrong's sake that urged me to continue and finally consummate the injury that I had inflicted upon the poor brute. One morning, in cool blood, I slipped a noose around his neck, hung him from the limb of a tree. I hung him with tears streaming from my eyes, and with the bitterest remorse in my heart. Hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because it had given me no reason for offense. Hung it because I knew that in doing so I was committing a sin. a deadly sin that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and terrible God. But then, on that very night, I was woken up from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains on my bed were in flames. The whole house was burning. My wife and I escaped. But the house's destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself to despair. The day after the fire, I visited the house. The walls had fallen in, save one. This exception was a thin wall which stood about the middle of the house, and against which rested the head of my bed. The plaster here had mostly resisted the fire. A dense crowd was collecting around the wall, and the people seemed to be examining it with particular interest. I heard the words weird and strange. As I approached, I saw, as if carved in bas relief on the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat, and there was a rope about the animal's neck. When I first saw this ghost, my fear and my horror were extreme. But I quickly thought about it. The cat had been hung up in the garden next to the house. Upon the sight of fire, the garden had been filled by a crowd. Someone had obviously thrown the cat through the window, probably with the intention of waking me from sleep. And then the fresh plaster and the lime of the wall, the flames and the ammonia from the carcass, created the image I saw now. Even as I realized this, I couldn't shake the image. But during this time, I dare say, I missed the animal. It was not remorse, but regret to have lost the animal. I began to look around me for another pet of the same species, of a somewhat similar appearance with which to replace him. One night, as I sat half drunk in my usual bar, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object. I approached it, touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, as large as Pluto, and looking for all the world like his twin, except for one thing. Pluto had not a single white hair, but this cat had a large white splotch covering his entire chest. So I adopted the animal. When it reached my house, it domesticated itself at once. It became immediately a favorite with my wife. But again, the feelings of annoyance came. Soon annoyance turned to anger, then to hate. Soon I couldn't stand the sight of the beast. What added to my hatred was the discovery, on the morning I brought it home, that, like Pluto, it also had been deprived of one of its eyes. A trait that only endeared it further to my wife, who, as I have already said, loved animals as much as I once did, so long ago. Slowly, I began to avoid the creature, even to fear it. A feeling that was only intensified when I discovered the once indistinct blot of white upon his chest had transformed. Once merely a stain, now it resembled the clearest shape, the shape of the gallows. In the day, the creature left me no moment alone, and at night I started hourly from dreams of utterances of fear to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight, an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off. One day, my wife accompanied me on some errand into the cellar. The cat, of course, followed me down the steep stairs, and, as I reached the bottom, nearly threw me headlong into the wall. Exasperated into madness, I uplifted an axe, and forgetting, in my wrath, that the childish dread which hitherto had held my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal, which would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I had wished. But the blow was blocked by the hand of my wife. Goaded by the interference, set into a rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew the axe from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot, without a sound. This hideous murder accomplished, I set forth immediately to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house, either by day or by night, without the risk of the neighbors seeing. Many ideas entered my mind. the thought of cutting the corpse into small bits and burying them. I thought of digging a grave in the floor of the cellar. I thought of packing it up in small packages and having it delivered from the house by postman. Then I finally got it. I would wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages did to their victims. Using a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and after carefully depositing the body against the inner wall, I laid the whole structure as it originally stood. Having bought mortar, sand, and hair with every possible precaution, I prepared the plaster, which could not be distinguished from the original wall. When I was done, I felt satisfied that all was right. The floor was picked up with the utmost care. My next step was to find the beast which had caused all this trouble, for I had finally, firmly resolved to put it to death. But it seemed the crafty animal had been alerted to my violent intent, for it did not present itself. It is impossible to describe the deep, blissful sense of relief that the absence of the detestable creature sprung up in me. It did not appear that night, so for one night at least, I slept soundly. Yes, slept peacefully, even with the burden of murder upon my soul. The second and third day passed, and still my tormentor was absent. The monster had fled forever. I would see it no more. My happiness was complete. A few inquiries were made about my wife, but they had been readily answered. Even a search had been undergone, but of course nothing was discovered. I looked upon my future freedom as secured. Upon the fourth day, a group of police came to my house and proceeded again to make a rigorous search of the premises. Secure, however, in the cunning of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatsoever. The officers asked me to accompany them in their search. They searched at length. For the third or fourth time they descended into the cellar. I didn't quiver a muscle. My heart beat calmly. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms. I roamed easily back and forth. The police were completely satisfied and preparing to depart, but the glee in my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say but one word by way of triumph, and to doubly assure my guiltlessness. "Gentlemen," I said, as the group climbed the stairs, "I delight to have allayed your suspicions. By the way, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house." In my rabid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew I had uttered this at all. "I must say, an excellently well-constructed house. These walls... Are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together." And here, through the frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily on the portion of the brick wall behind which stood the corpse of my wife. No sooner had the reverberation of my blow sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb, by a cry, at first muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream. Utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror, half of triumph, such as might have arisen out of hell, conjoined from the throats of the damned in their agony, and the demons that exult in their damnation. I staggered to the opposite wall, and for one instant the party upon the stairs remained motionless. The next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red, extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled up the monster within the tomb.